So, our stress reactivity, again, we get it from our genetic makeup and from our home environments, how our parents handle stress, how our siblings handle stress. It impacts how we handle stress and our ability to adapt. If we were in environments that taught us how to adapt, then we have emotional, flexibility, and we're healthy. We can be sad and then we can, be happy, and we're just adaptable. We don't get stuck in one emotional landscape. I can say over the years as a family, we have specifically been working on our communication, which means we have to work on our emotional responses, and it is healthy. Like, we can disagree and then we can laugh, or we can finish watching the movie, or we can finish the game. As before, it would cause more tension and we would separate and we'd be emotionally distraught longer. But as you adapt to, your emotions, if you're in environments that are healthy, it teaches you to adapt to what's going on emotionally and being stable. So it's so important that you're in environments where you see people get upset. You see people be angry and sin not. You see that because it teaches adaptation. Your environment teaches emotional adaptation. You need that to be healthy. All right. Lastly, lived or experienced trauma. It's layer 5. This impacts, and I've kind of touched on it, but it impacts your emotions and your emotion stability. It impacts emotions because trauma touches our attachment style. A lot of people have attachment wounds, meaning that from their caregiver, they weren't shown safety. Right? They didn't cry and get fed. They didn't cry and get a diaper. They didn't cry and get picked up. They didn't cry and get their needs met. So that taught them that if I have a need, my needs won't get met. So either they have anxious attachment, where they're constantly trying to connect and get their needs met, disorganized attachment, where sometimes my needs were met, sometimes they weren't. That affects your emotions and how you deal with people, because we're attached to humanity. God's calling us into relationship. So we're constantly looking at society, work, home, church, the world, and how we are connecting. And we're connecting from the landscape of our attachment style of origin. That affects our emotions. If we feel ignored, if we feel left out, if we feel threatened, in any way, we're sensitive because of our attachment style. If we don't feel safe, like we can trust people and that people are going to be there for us, it's going to keep us on an emotional whirlwind. If you don't text me back, my attachment style is going to give me the message that you don't care about me. You're going to abandon me. I did something wrong. I have to be a pleaser to get your love back. And it keeps you in that chasing loop. Or you feel like people are not safe, so you run, you bunker down, you isolate, you don't form connection, you are on your phone, you live on your phone, you live to yourself, you refuse to connect with people, you refuse to try, so you end up being alone for your life or alone with a pet for your life, because your emotions are so dysregulated because of your attachment wounds. People have attachment wounds, and we wonder why people respond because their name was left off the program. Attachment wound. We wonder why people are so sensitive if they weren't invited out. Attachment wound. We wonder why people don't want to speak or talk in the office or talk at church or come to family functions. Attachment wounds. And even if you didn't cause that wound, the parents did, it's still going to affect you. Your spouse, your child, the person you love, your coworker. Attachment wounds influence our emotions. That is trauma. That's layer 5. It's important to understand that people are operating emotionally from attachment wounds. Attachment wounds. It's really sad. I could do a whole lesson on that, and I have. But that influences your emotions, how you feel. You feel loved, you feel sad, you feel, forsaken, you feel abandoned, you feel rejected. That impacts people so much that in the church, that rejection from the attachment wound, they want to be the pastor, they want to be the apostle, they want to be the bishop, they want to be the singer, they want to be on stage because they want to feel safe, they want to feel like someone likes them, they want to please, they want to perform because of attachment wounds. They weren't made to feel connected and safe just because of who they were, not because of what they did, but because of who they were. So those attachment wounds cause a lot of blow-ups disproportionately to the event. People are blowing up and cutting people off, and it stems back to an attachment wound from the family of origin or some other episode or incident, but we have to live with it. Betrayal, being cheated on, being lied on, being left, or any type of betrayal, that influences your emotions because now you're suspicious. Now you don't trust people. Now you are sensitive to how people connect with you. That influences your emotions. If you've ever been betrayed, it is a trauma response. Betrayal is a trauma response. You married 20 years, 30 years, and your spouse cheats on you, and now everything about your reality is shaken because you trusted this person, and now you're no longer saved. That affects your emotions with yourself, with other people, with God. God, how could you let this happen? It affects your emotions. You feel like maybe God will betray me. Maybe, no one will be. I can't trust anyone. Children who parents divorce, that is secondary betrayal feelings. You feel like, okay, if my parents can betray one another, they can betray me. And that causes emotional instability, and it influences how your emotions. So now you're constantly watching your parents to see if they're going to keep their word, if they're fair, if they're consistent, because you've watched them just betray their vows and walk away for whatever reasons, even if, whatever reason. But the betrayal sticks, and that becomes a part of your experience. The instability affects your emotions. If you moved a lot, like I said, people moved in and out of your home, people going to jail, people, changing schools, changing homes, financial instability, car being repossessed, moving. That instability is traumatic because we all need safety and security. It affects your emotions. So if someone changes plans on you, you're liable to flip out because you crave consistency and predictability. So now you're feeling like you can't trust the person. The person doesn't care about you. I mean, you respond disproportionately to the incident because you're emotionally triggered by instability. Things changing. We used to do things this way. What do you mean I'm not over this ministry anymore? What do you mean I don't get to lead this song anymore? What do you mean I'm not over the children anymore? That instability and that change can emotionally dysregulate you and make you feel like you're in danger. And it bring back all of those emotions. It just opens that door even wider to the emotional trauma that you had previously in your life. You do not like things to change because it feels like instability. You'll stay in a broken relationship, at a job that's not good for you because it scares you too much to change. Some people, and it works both ways, some people can't do stability because they've had so much change and stability scares them. They're used to instability. And some people crave stability because they've had so much instability. They can't manage when people are not predictable or consistent, or when people are human, because it's just so much of pain associated with that. So instability, chronic stress. If you're constantly under stress, that trauma, it wears you down. It sends messages like you're never going to get better. Things are never going to change for you. You're anxious because you expect the rug to be pulled out from under you. That's just been your life. The struggle has always been real. So that chronic stress from the trauma, it influences how you emote. It influences your emotions. And of course, the trauma lived trauma influences your emotions through emotional dysregulation. And that's what I've just described. Now you have a mood disorder. Now you're anxious. Now you're depressed. And it is all because of what you've experienced. You have, you go from 0 to 100 very quickly. And I don't even think that's fair to say. We say 0 to 100, but no one's going from 0 to 100. What happens is that for most people, when you're under stress, if this is 0 and this is 100, you're more likely to be right here or close to 100 because you haven't got a chance, your baseline, you haven't got a chance to relax. So your baseline is pretty high. So when things happen, you tip over quickly. And then the people who live down here or whose emotional landscape and baseline is down here, they're judging you because they feel like you're going to 0, 100, not realizing that you never came completely down because you have so much trauma, you have so much stress that you are easily triggered into overboard to 100 and spilling. Some people live at 100, 90, 80. And so when things happen, you have big responses and the people around you are trying to figure out, why do you overreact? Why can't you calm down? Which is unfair because if you are emotionally stable, you're between 0 and 30, life is between 0 and 30. But for people who have stress and chronic stress and trauma, you're somewhere between 70, 80, 90, and 100 on a regular. So it doesn't take much for you to top over because you're already living in a high stress internal environment. So that's how trauma impacts your emotions, layer 5. This internal warfare, it is internal warfare. And I think we need to be more gracious to people. And we need to understand that people, yes, while they have an Adamic nature, some people are really trying to be better. People who come to church, for the most part, are trying to do better. People in life are trying to do better. And because this is a Christian-based message, I'll stick to church. But people who come to church on some level, they are trying to do better. Even if they're trying to do better for their spouse to get, things right at home, or if they're trying to do better for themselves. We have to recognize there's an internal tug of war. Paul said, in my member is another member warring against the mind of Christ. And if we look at that emotionally, in my member is another emotion warring against my emotional stability that Christ wants me to have. It's a tug of war. 5 layers versus the new man. But greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. There is a lot to overcome, but Christ has gained victory. We are fighting from a place of victory, but we don't understand the victory and we don't understand the word. So we haven't been able to take authority and apply the word for our victory. This informational session and platform is giving you information so that you can have authority and take your rightful authority and be spiritually and be emotionally and psychologically whole. This tug of war is real. We're watching internal tug of wars in real time. We're watching it in real time. People flying off the handle, church people cursing people out, being violent. We're watching the internal tug of war in real time. We're watching spirit-led trust versus trust in self, where people, they want to be led by the Spirit. In some areas, they can trust God, but in some areas, they just have to fight for themselves. In some areas, they've just conditioned to, make things happen on their own. If they have to lie, cheat, steal, borrow, or beg, they're going to make it happen outside of the scriptures. There's a tug of war in faith and fear. You want to trust God. He promised to be with you, but then you feel lonely. And so you do things to, compensate for that fear that you have. You fear that you won't ever find a mate. So you go out and find one and sleep with them and try to make them yours, and God has not given them to you. You know, protection versus suspicion. You want to feel protected, but then you feel like you got to watch your back. You have to watch people. You can't let your guard down. And then there's, you know, familial truth versus God's truth. You struggle. You know, grandma says if you don't get them in the wash, get them in the rinse. The Bible says vengeance is mine. So now the tug of war is emotionally, I want to do things the way my family do things. We don't forgive people. We hold grudges. But the Bible is saying forgive. That's an internal tug of war, right? And so we're faced with letting go of familial truths and adopting God's truth. And we see that in real time. We're Creole, we're this, we're that, we're Indian, we're, West Indies, we're this, we're Italian. We say all these things and we allow those things to shape our emotional response instead of the word. We do half word, half familial, generational ideas and beliefs. And then we have bashful versus courageous. The internal warfare is we feel shame or we don't feel good enough. And God is calling us to be courageous. Sometimes we're courageous. Sometimes we can't speak up for ourselves. Sometimes we won't walk in the authority or walk in the gifts and the calling or the jobs and the promotion because there's a part of us that doesn't feel worthy. But yet, at church, sometimes we feel courageous. We say things like, I can do all things through Christ and greater is he. But yet in our personal life, we don't assert ourselves. We don't tell people what we want. We don't tell people what we need. We see the tug of war in connection versus isolation. We know that we're supposed to be a body. We know that we're supposed to love people. We may feed the homeless, but then we don't talk to our family. We don't connect on a deep level with our spouse, our children, our siblings, the people at work. So we have, speckles of connection, and that's the internal war. We know that we're supposed to come to church, but then we don't want to speak to anybody, shake hands, or hug. So we're fighting the tug of war of connection and isolation based on our emotional health and what we've been through. Then there's sexual purity versus